Hello, everyone. Nice to be here. I have to say, when I came in this morning and saw all these presentations from all the designers, I felt and still feel very insecure about my slides. Because if there is one thing in the work that I do for the last more than 2 decades is I'm not so good at looking back. Or kind of documenting what I do. But in the friendly introduction, there was some explaining, and I understand Latin language a little bit better, so I can understand what it was about. But this is the title of my talk, and I try to get because I do a lot of talks and a lot of international workshops. I go to conferences all over Europe. I'm also active as an organizer in a lot of countries. But I try to really follow also this idea of recreatie. I'm mispronouncing this, but it's the same in Dutch. That was what kind of triggered me, recreatie in Dutch. It has a different meaning. I think for us, it's just like free time. It's that's the idea. But what I planned to do and what I will talk about today is to end with some suggestions and some perspectives from my own personal experiences working in music to give ideas about potential futures for recreatie and for artists to look at their careers and touring specifically in a different way, in a more innovative way. This title, of course, is very long, and it also says a lot about me because I have to use a lot of words always to find and to distill the meaning that it's for me, because for me this is everything. And I will try to come to these examples by using the experiences and the way that I built up my own little enterprise and my own organic system and ecosystem around me. I've never used one of these things. I have no idea. Do that. So yeah, this is me. This is me 2 years ago in Osaka when I was touring with the band Tramhouse that I'm a manager of. I'm not good at going on the picture, so I just use this one because it's funny. For me, outside of visiting concerts and being an organizer in. Pretty much, I started working in the sector in 2004 when we founded independent record label Subroutine, which from the beginning on had the idea of being non-profit. And of course, even making a profit in the music industry is very often a fantasy. But for us, it was the starting point because we felt like, and I still feel like the music industry is inherently exploitative and basically just working on the fuel of a lot of hopes and dreams of young people, and we wanted to be a counter narrative. And this is also what we'll talk about. This I will read from the note because it's again way too long. For me, the idea about this talk was in a dynamic sector where terms like export territories and algorithms are so prevalent and toxic industry mythology, short-term returns and financial incentives dominate the discourse. I propose a radical counter-narrative based on sustainability, horizontal organic connections, mutual values, and reciprocity. So that's that. I would very much also like to talk about these topics not being on the stage, so I hope to discuss these issues with you also afterwards. But I will start with the Subroutine. So Subroutine now exists for 20 years. In September, we will have a big celebration. And it was founded by me and a good friend of mine from university in Groningen in the underground music club Vera. And Vera is very central for me as an organizer, but also as someone active in music, because Vera is an association that works with volunteers. So it's a music club where there's 4 concerts a week the whole year long, but it's also the place that has all this history in music. Everybody has performed there from U2 to Nirvana to Joy Division. It exists since the late 70s, but specifically this idea of being a part of something bigger and creating also meaning in working in the music without the financial incentive became also something very relevant and meaningful for me. So when we started the record label, we started working with bands from the Netherlands. I started organizing events. And one of the bigger events that came on my path was, and I should have put a lot of flyers here, but I'm glad I did not, because compared to the professionals that were before me, my flyers that I make myself in MS Paint. The reason I do this because I could also ask a designer to do it, but because the flyers I make for my event, it's very meaningful that I do the whole process myself. So in the afternoon, I went with my colleague Dan, who is from Moldova, also around town to get inspired, also for future posters and for future things that I can organize. But van onderen, which it literally means from below, but it's also a term that you would use if a tree is falling. It's a festival I organized in Paradiso in Amsterdam, which is a very iconic music venue in an old church in the middle of the town. And it was the first time that Paradiso was open for 24 hours. And we had 180 concerts in 3 rooms. This cost me a few years of my life and a lot of my hair. But this is also fun. How you can create meaning without having the financial incentives, because the whole purpose of this event was to highlight underground movements. And in the years afterwards, of course, I was already organizing concerts in the Netherlands, and simultaneously I was traveling a lot in Western Balkans. So it's again funny that now I'm talking after our Bosnian friends, because my company, Yugofuturism, is inspired and based on my years in youth work. I did a lot of youth and action projects and a lot of exchanges. I was a volunteer myself. I lived in Macedonia, in Kosovo, and in Belgrade for a long time. And at one point, for me, it became clear that if I wanted to do some, after working for a lot of bosses and a lot of different cultural institutions over the years in communication, in press promotion, I decided that for me, the next step had to be to start something that would represent me and all the different connections and things that I have done that mattered to me, both in music and in more value-based work. So that became Yugofuturism, as opposed to the existing concept of Yugo nostalgia, which might ring a bell with some, for sure with one. But Yugo nostalgia is this idea that exists in most post-socialist countries, from like the grandparents looking back at the time when everybody had a job and there was like a national purpose and a national identity. For me, this is, of course, being from the West, cannot be something that I'm involved in, but Yugofuturism also represents the slogan and the ideology of brotherhood and unity, which was the national slogan of Yugoslavia. And even when that motto is nowadays, of course, tainted by history, they're still like working in multi-ethnic regions, as I did, is very relevant for what I do and what I want to do. We found it in the university years. Yeah, I'm all over the place, I'm sorry. In university in 2004, it's around the same time that I started the label. We had a special visitor who received an honorary doctorate in the University of Groningen, where I now also teach, Mikhail Gorbachev. And Gorbachev came, and it was one of these moments when you were when you have this idea like, okay, this is how many times do you have the chance to be in the same room as a historical figure that is usually only known from the 8 o'clock news. So we decided to be in line, but there was only room for 40 students, so we had to be in line at 6 in the morning. And everybody, of course, we were students and was in our early 20s, so everybody was already hungover. Groningen has no closing times as the only city in the Netherlands. So that organization that we founded while waiting in the line, Spartak, became our main operation, organizing festivals, using music as a medium to bring young people together from multi. So we did festivals in Vranje in South Serbia, where there is a Macedonian, Serbian, and Albanian multi-ethnic region. We did festivals in Vukovar, which is a very famous city also in East Slavonia in Croatia. And we did a festival in Tešanje in Bosnia, on the mountain, which is also on the border of the Republika Srpska and Federation Bosnia. So I've said that. For me, Yugofuturism also in the work that I do represents something which basically combines the youth work with my musical activities. So it's very personal to me. And that brings us to what is basically also one of the reasons that I wanted to visit Chisinau for such a long time already. I wrote my thesis, and a lot of the work that I do comes down to music scenes. I wrote my master thesis about Glasgow, the music scene, and specifically what are the building blocks of a music scene. And in recent years, this idea of an ecosystem became very dominant. And an ecosystem, of course, you think about it in the biological way, is nurtured by various things, and everything that's happening inside this ecosystem matters in the total output and in the relations that it will have with different ecosystems around it. Famous ones, of course, are usually looked at from the national or regional perspective, are antagonal to each other. So Glasgow, the reason that I wanted to go there is because there was literally a moment in time where the musician Bobby Gillespie, famous from the Jesus and Mary chain and later Primal Scream, is considered the last musician from Glasgow to move to London to make his career there. And afterwards, people were like, nah, we're not going to do that. We want to build up our own thing in Glasgow in Scotland. And in various generations of musical output, record labels, events, that led to, for instance, Teenage Fan Club, Franz Ferdinand, and a lot of these bands. Various generation of Glasgow music history. Specifically happening there, so when I was there doing my field work, is doing research also about what record stores were important, who was organizing these events, who was organizing that, and how are they helping each other. And interestingly, what I found there is that within these various generations, the musical output of the bands was very different. So you had not a scene with bands that all sounded the same. You had very, very different kinds of music. And I think you can find parallels for that in a lot of the other examples that I put. So there is also the center versus periphery thing between Wrocław in Poland and Warsaw, the capital, but also in Groningen versus Amsterdam. And I think the periphery, I'm always interested in. I was born in the periphery in the Netherlands. It always influences the center. So there is a constant dynamic, dialogue, and this is also key to my theory about music scenes and why it's also relevant, because I'm looking also at the perspective from Chișinău, which is obviously also periphery. And the reason that I wanted to come is also to make it less of a periphery and to try to include also this region in a larger way of thinking connected to Central and Eastern Europe and Western Balkans. So these ecosystems, and they are connected always, and this is a kind of a easy metaphor to think about by underground railroads. So there is always a constant exchange of dynamic, of energy, of audiences, of bands that are constantly being exchanged. And in this way, these music scenes communicate with each other. But you need to start somewhere. And I think this is the idea of DIY, do it yourself, the title of the talk, besides being a take on a REM album from the 90s. DIY, do it yourself, requires action. You have to be the catalyst yourself. So for me, visiting here is also about making connections with local musicians, with local organizers, with Artcore. I hope also to do that tomorrow in the music conference that I hope to curate for the organization. For me, it's relevant to look at Chișinău and Moldova from the perspective of trying to build new lines. And I have the professional deformity already that when I think about the map of Europe, I'm always thinking about what is the distance between the different cities. I organize concerts now, basically everything in between Glasgow and Istanbul and Lisboa and Tallinn. Everywhere I'm building up my own network, but also combining with different people. So I'm one of these spiders in a much bigger web of people that are constantly communicating with each other, exchanging bands, organizing tours, exchanging knowledge, best practice, and all these things. But it happens in a value-based way. So it's very much non-commercial. This for Yugofuturism, and I've worked also with bands, and never with a band from Moldova, so hopefully that will also change. But I also did big tours with a band from Bucharest, Karpov Not Kasparov. I heard in the presentation before us about Control Club in Bucharest. I organized concerts there as well. So for me, this is the way where I feel that for me it's the only way to move forward within these scenes. And for me, what I'm looking at is also what are these building blocks. So everything that is part of the ecosystem also influences. So it's the music venues, the promoters, the record store, the sound check, but even the people that are cooking for the bands, that are offering their couch for bands to sleep on. This is all part of a larger thing. And yes, then we come to this part here. One of the things that I feel also is now getting more dominant when we talk about the European music scene and about touring is this concept of slow touring. And we talk about sustainability and about recreatie. Slow touring is a concept in which bands are not on the tour to play a different city every day, but also spend more time in one place. And there's various ways of doing this. You can talk about, for instance, about residencies. I will give some example after this. But I feel the impact and the sustainability and specifically the relations that you build as a touring musician get a lot better in the way when you look at touring like that. And specifically nowadays with the various forms of European funding and also local funding, it becomes more feasible for bands to also do that. So also to perform in various places in that visit, also connecting with schools, doing instrument workshops and all these things. And I think the connection that the musicians have with the local scene become much better, in which you can grow together as well. This example that I put here is a festival that I started myself 3 years ago, Vikendica. Vikendica is a term from Western Balkans. It says in the text, I know it's like a dacha. It's a summer house. But Vikendica, what makes it relevant is that you bring bands from all over Europe to one country, like the Netherlands, and we traveled together by train. And I think my favorite moments of the last years were sitting in a train from Groningen in the north of the Netherlands to Rotterdam. It was a 3-hour train in one wagon. And I was looking around. I was surrounded by the 3 Slovak members from the band Berlin Manson. Then on the right side was the duo Losada Fontan from Catalonia, speaking in Catalan with each other. Behind them was Super Coloritas from Lithuania, speaking in Lithuanian. Behind that was the formed in Moscow, but now all over the world, a very critical band about the regime, Glintshake, that I invited. And then in the back was the Dutch band, who was kind of amused by the various discussions. And I think within slow touring, it's also turning this around, because the musicians all made a much bigger connection with each other, because they spent 4 days together, traveling together. And this idea of also bringing bands to independent music venues, bringing local musicians also to communicate with them, is very much key in the work that I wanted to be doing. I was looking for a way to make this sustainable touring more positive and more possible also for me, and this became one of the solutions I came up with myself. I need very little money for this in the Netherlands. I get funded from the music venues. I don't need extra subsidies. I can pay the bands quite easily, because the music venues participate in the budget, and the impact is much bigger this way for me. Finally, on this presentation, I don't know how long I am already in this, but you've been listening to presentations the whole day, so if I'm too short, then it's also probably not a big issue. I will give 2 examples of residency places within this idea of recreatie also that I found very inspiring. The first is Stereo Space in Kosovo. This is how it looked when it was found. It's a community center in a small village outside of the capital of Pristina. You probably know Kosovo has a violent history and a quite recent independence from Serbia. But a friend of mine, Guri Škodra, a very idealist musician also, is quite a successful established musician, has a good job, and he decided he also wanted to give back to the community. So they adopted this community center, an old school that was destroyed in a village called Lukar. And they found the money, national money in Kosovo to repurpose this. And what they did was invite all the musicians from the Kosovo music scene, some of them very famous ones. I mean, not famous Dua Lipa famous, but famous enough on the local level. And they started doing music sessions there, live sessions, recorded Lukar live sessions. And that way, the local kids from this village all could watch these famous bands and were also made part of this community, which was also very meaningful for these musicians to play these smaller concerts in the village. And they ended up with very good live material, which they could use to promote their shows. So the last picture, of course, is a children's event in the same space. But the cool thing about Stereo Space, also from next year, they will have space for 5 musicians to stay there a week also. There will be like guest rooms and all this stuff. So in this way, I feel also when we talk about slow touring, and this is a very successful way at looking and also giving back and learning also from the local scene. The second example is closer to home for me, and for more experimental musicians, a dream come true, I think. Worm. Worm is a music venue in Rotterdam where I'm also external promoter, and Worm has the Klangendam studio, and their deal is basically that if you do a free concert, you can have a residency with their studio for a week. And their studio has, besides I think a couple of dozen very rare synthesizers from all over the world, full setup with sound table and drums, and then finally they have all of these weird soundwave machines, which is all from a big private collection, and they will all put together there. It basically looks like a 70s James Bond radar studio there. But this was the last example that I wanted to mention also, in the way of looking at touring differently. Let me look at my thing to see if for sure I forgot something, but I can very happy to talk to you about this afterwards with a drink. And I think that's pretty much it. So thank you for your attention.
Thank you. Are cineva întrebări? Eram sigură.
Hi, thank you so much for your presentation. I was looking at Tramhouse at the band, and I see that they are fully booked with a tour, and that a lot of the shows are sold out. So congratulations for that. I wonder how do you choose the venues in different cities? Do you choose venues that already have their own audience that keeps going to gigs that happen in that venue, or what's your approach?
Yeah, it's a good question. For me, the thing is, I know here in Moldova, Tramhouse doesn't have a big reputation yet because promotion-wise, they've never been to the region. They've been to Belgrade. They will play in Transylvania, not Transnistria, Transylvania in Hozman, a village, in the summer. So that's their first Romanian gig. For me, the thing with Tramhouse is they're so famous now in the Netherlands and growing, emerging in Europe, that I feel if I talk about them too much, it's also for me because as their manager, it becomes too dominant. And I always try to separate my own activities. But in many ways, Tramhouse is also, which I know because I've been working with them from the early years, from the beginning in 2022. They're very young, 20 years younger than me. Tramhouse is also, in many ways, the proof that I'm right about my theories and about the way that I perceive the music industry. With Tramhouse, immediately from the first year, I will come to your question, but this is relevant. We immediately knew that we did not want to sign with a bigger booking agency, with UK booking agencies, like ATC or Earth Agency, the big ones, which is usually seen as the goal for any band, because that's the idea that you will go to the biggest festival and the bigger stage. Now, we wanted to do it from the grassroots level, and that's also come from the band. Of course, I did not force them to do anything. So we decided to work with 9 different booking agencies, smaller booking agencies, independent booking agencies in every different territory. So we have a booking agency in Netherlands, Belgium, France, Spain, Portugal, Germany, England, Asia, which of course is bizarre, but that's because we just made the first tour there. So, and then I am, as a specialist and one of the few people that organizes tours in Central and Eastern Europe and the Balkans for 2 decades, I'm looking at this territory. So that comes to the question. We're working with people that know these regions very well. And that makes sure we put this trust, this agency in the hands of the people we wanted to work with that are like bona fide for us. And we give them the trust to find these venues. And in this way, because also Tramhouse is very eager to tour, they did last year 125 shows, of which 94 in 22 countries. It's completely bizarre. This year they will not get to the 124, but they will add more countries. So this is it. And this is also, I mean, you can read in between the lines of what I'm talking about here. Autonomy for a musician, but I think for any artist is key. And very often this idea is sold to you that if you really want to make it and to make it work financially, you have to work with assholes. This is not true. And Tramhouse is just one example of why I know I'm right about this. Of course, you have to, luck is a way. Of course, the privilege of living in the Netherlands and having a passport that opens doors easier than people from the other side of Europe. But at the same time, Tramhouse is also still active in organizing concerts for other bands every week when they're at home.
Thank you.